Colorado has a new congressional district, the most competitive in the state. Brighton and Commerce City in Adams County up north to Greeley. Suburban neighborhoods and farms, home to oil and gas production from start to finish. Almost 40% of the Coloradans who live here are Hispanic, more than any other district in Colorado. Voters here will send a new voice to Washington once they choose which woman is right for the job. Republican State Senator Barb Kirkmeyer or Democratic State Representative Dr. Yadira Caraveo. They debate tonight on Next Presents the Race for Congress. Thank you for joining us. I'm Kyle Clark, joined tonight by State Senator Barbara Kirkmeyer and State Representative Dr. Yadira Caraveo. Thank you both for coming in and being willing to share your views.
Thank you, Kyle.
A note for the folks at home, with the exception of our introductions and our conclusions in the debate, we do not refer to candidates using elected or educational titles. Thought being that you as voters will determine on Election Day who is going to hold the title representative. And we should note, candidates, you have agreed to a couple of basic ground rules in advance: 45-second answers, continued discussion at my discretion, 1-minute closing statements, and at least one chance to ask each other questions as we respectfully talk about where you agree and where you disagree. So let's get started with the economy and cost of living. And we'll begin by hearing from a resident of the district. Robin Martinez's family has lived in the Thornton area for 5 generations now, and the 6th generation of her family is thinking about leaving.
My son just recently graduated college and is looking for his first home. Unfortunately, due to the high cost of rent and limited options for first-time home buyers, he's having to consider moving out of state.
So, Ms. Caraveo, first question to you: what can Congress do to bring down the cost of living and encourage affordable housing in Colorado?
You know, I think the prime thing that Congress can do, and that I will fight for if I am elected the first Congresswoman from Colorado's 8th District, is to really focus on affordable housing by funding it. At the state level, we can do a lot more things hands-on. I have done those as a state legislator by making sure that we're looking at exorbitant fees that renters are being charged, by making sure that we're looking at the costs around evictions, and by lowering costs for families across the board. It was one of the reasons that I left my pediatric practice and decided to run for office. I was seeing the difficulty that families like my own hardworking, working class families were having to stay in places like Thornton. And so when I am in Congress, I will focus on making sure that we are funding affordable housing and that we are countering the costs that we're seeing increasing everywhere in Colorado.
So federal funding for affordable housing by raising more revenue through some source or cutting elsewhere. How do you see that working?
You know, I think that it's important at the federal government level and everywhere to do what we do in Colorado, to make sure that government is spending responsibly, that when we are spending it is going to the people that need it most, to working class families, and that we are making sure that our government is efficient. I think there are probably a lot of things that we can look at to make sure that money is going to places where it needs to, like healthcare and housing.
Ms. Kirkmeyer, same question to you. What can Congress do about the cost of living in Colorado and possibly affordable housing?
First thing they can do is stop the spending, stop the reckless spending, cut taxes, and really go in and look at how do we get our deficit spending under control. We have basically in this state the highest inflation rate across the United States. It just went up to 16%. Highest inflation rate ever. We've got a 40-year high inflation rate here, and all we can do in Congress is just keep spending. We don't have a balanced budget. We need to balance the budget. We need to stop spending so much. We don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. Basically, what's going on because of the cost of living and the increases in inflation is, on average, Coloradoans are spending $11,783 more this year than they did 2 years ago. That means the cost of food has gone up, the cost of housing has gone up, the cost of gasoline has gone up. So we need to stop spending, and what we can also do is unleash American energy production here in Colorado, here in the United States. Get those jobs back. Let's get good paying jobs.
That's time there. So I understand the connection between spending and inflation. Could you explain the connection between lowering government spending and affordable housing in Colorado? How do we increase affordable housing stock, or is there nothing that the federal government can do on that?
What the federal government has done with their increase in inflation is, again, increased mortgage rates. We just had a huge increase. In fact, we have doubled interest rates just in the last year. It's up to, what, 6.75? So because of inflation and what's going on, and we're entering into a recession, we've got the federal government that's increased interest rates by, what, just 0.75, just even in the last week or so, and they're talking about another 0.75 by the end of the year. So we've more than doubled interest rates. That's making it unaffordable for people to buy a home, or even, quite frankly, to pay for rent at this point. So federal government needs to stop spending. We need to cut inflation.
I'd like you both to hear from a woman who lives in North Glen, who told us that she's voted in the past, but actually is not planning on voting this year. She and her husband have their hands full. They're really struggling to keep their small business running. Her name is Zulema Talamantes.
He estado aquí en Colorado por más de 20 años. Mi esposo y yo tenemos una pequeña compañía de construcción. El principal tema de preocupación que tenemos es que las pequeñas empresas no tienen tanto apoyo del gobierno o de asociaciones para salir adelante en tiempos difíciles y es complicado mantener una compañía porque todo sale de nuestras bolsas.
Ms. Kirkmeyer, I would love to hear what you would say to Zulema and to other small business owners in the 8th about what the federal government could and should be doing to help them.
I would say this, and being a former small business owner myself, government needs to get out of the way of how we run our businesses or how they run their businesses. The additional mandates, the additional rules, regulations that they're putting on government increases the cost of services, increases the cost of goods, makes it more difficult to be able to run a business. Again, back to the inflation. It's a problem. Back to the Inflation Reduction Act that was just passed, put additional taxes onto small business. I've been endorsed by the National Federation of Independent Businesses because of my small business background, but also because I support them in saying that we shouldn't have passed that bill. It increased taxes on small businesses. So small businesses are bearing the brunt of these inflationary costs. It's making it more difficult also for them to hire workers. We have a worker shortage going on. And again, this is because of poor policies that we have at the federal government level.
Ms. Caraveo, same question to you. What is the role of the federal government in helping small business owners like Zulema and her husband?
Well, thank you, first of all, to the question from Zulema. Muchas gracias por la pregunta. Es una pregunta muy importante. I have consistently made sure that we are voting to support small businesses in Colorado. We cut taxes for small businesses. We made sure that the earned income tax credit and child tax credit, which families like Zulema's family, I'm sure, need, were continued in Colorado. And I have really focused on making sure that we are cutting costs for working families across the board. Importantly, looking at healthcare costs. That is something that a lot of small businesses I know struggle with. And in Colorado, I made sure to support the public option bill, which I will point out my opponent did not support. That is something that is going to create pressure on insurance companies in Colorado to make sure that we're lowering costs for families like Zulema's.
Please.
I would just point out that my opponent, Yadira, voted for the largest property tax increase in the state of Colorado with the mill levy equalization bill. Increased property taxes higher than a local government would have done. It basically was about $145 million through this next year, and it just keeps growing and keeps adding on. That's a cost that businesses have to figure out how to soak up because they have a larger assessment ratio, they're paying more taxes. With regard to healthcare, public option, I'm just going to remind my opponent again that in 2017, this state voted against universal health care, voted against the public option bill, basically. So again, we want to help business out, stop with the mandates, stop with the overburdensome regulations.
The public option bill is not universal health care. It is actually very different, and as a doctor, I can really go into the details of how different this is. What this does is places pressure on the market to make sure that insurance companies are not charging exorbitant fees, that there is a proper pressure to make sure that the market is working and that we're making sure to place pressure to lower those costs.
And do you care to address what she said about a tax increase?
You know, I have consistently voted to lower taxes on working families. I voted to lower taxes on small businesses, and I will continue to do so in Congress. I
imagine we could continue to talk about taxes. Let's talk about another issue.
Okay.
You have very different views on abortion access, so I'd like to discuss that. Ms. Caraveo, you passed a bill that preserved abortion access in Colorado with no restrictions, even on third trimester abortions, and according to Pew Research, that's not where most Americans are on the issue of abortions. Pew's research said 29% of Americans support abortion without restriction, as Colorado now has. Would you be looking to pass a similar no restrictions on abortion law nationwide?
I think what we need to do in Congress is codify Roe v. Wade. That is a right that has been taken away from women after 50 years. That is what I think we need to do nationally. These are discussions that have to happen between a doctor and a family member and a woman, not something the government needs to be interfering with. My opponent wants to support a national ban on abortion, that would have no exceptions, even for rape, incest, or the life of the mother. That is something that perhaps she is walking back from now. I trust women. I trust people to make their own medical decisions. I've done that as a doctor. I will continue to do that as a legislator, because this is something where Senator Kirkmeyer does not need to be in your exam room or your bedroom. This is a private decision that needs to happen within a family and with their doctor.
So you said that you would like to see Congress codify Roe. That's different than what Colorado has, which is abortion without restriction. And my question was, would you seek to pass a Colorado-style no restriction on abortion law nationwide?
I would focus on codifying Roe v. Wade, a right that has been taken away from women despite being the law of the land for 50 years.
Ms. Kirkmeyer, you had previously said a couple years ago that you oppose all abortions, no exceptions. You've now said during this race that you support an exception for the life of the mother. So I have two questions around the same issue. Who should determine when the life of the mother is at risk? And should the government be providing any specific support to victims of rape and incest if the government is going to force them to carry their pregnancy to term?
So I think with regards to your first question, who should provide that support or who should make that decision? Again, I think that's through the woman, the mom, and her doctor, looking at it and determining what they need to do. That's what doctors do, that's what moms do, and the patient needs to do. So it needs to be between them. And your second question was?
Second question was, if the government is going to force rape and incest victims to carry their pregnancies to term, should the government be providing any specific support to those women?
Well, so first of all, I would say this. Again, in this state, we have a constitutional requirement that says we don't pay for any public funding of abortions. So I think that would be pretty difficult to, otherwise we'd be going against the Constitution. But second of all, as a county commissioner, I've actually funded, women's health care is extremely important to me. First of all, I am a woman, I have 2 daughters. But as a county commissioner, I've actually funded the Weld County Health Department, funded health clinics, funded I'm at the end.
That's okay. I appreciate you both being very careful about the time, but I want to make sure that we're clear on this issue. Your opponent said that you're interested in a national abortion ban. Are you?
I don't believe I've ever stated that, so I'm not
sure.
Well,
I'm asking you right now.
So at this point, no. I'm looking at, again, I'm pro-life. I've always said I was pro-life. And I have, and it's been more than just a couple of years. I looked at it, and my position did evolve to that the life of the mother, it makes sense. I guess just in my mind, if the mother passes, obviously the child inside of her is going to pass as well. So we need to make that exception.
No, please go
on. With regard, again, could you tell me the question again? I'm sorry.
No, I wanted clarity on the national abortion ban.
I'm going to support whatever saves lives. It's not an all or nothing thing to me. If there is a way to save some lives, I'm going to work to save some lives.
Okay. You want a final thought before we moved on?
Yes, I think it's important to note that she said at this point, now that she is running for a general election, suddenly she is trying to moderate her position. She said in 2014, I do not support any exceptions to abortions. She said in 2020 that she was 100% pro-life, no exceptions. Suddenly, when we're in the middle of a general election, perhaps she's trying to moderate and hide her views from Coloradans. But I think it is important to note what the history is here, and that as a commissioner, she has not supported women's reproductive rights. She actually voted as a commissioner to ban Plan B from Weld County clinics. She has not supported women's reproductive rights, whether it has to do with contraception or with abortion, but she's trying to moderate her position.
She's saying that her view changed on something. You don't believe that it's genuine?
I don't believe that it is. I think that we have many statements in the past of her saying that she does not support any exceptions to rape. Now any exceptions to abortion, even in the cases of rape or incest. Now she's saying that it's up to the mother. She wants to take that away with the national abortion ban, which importantly would ban abortion in Colorado.
A final thought before we move on.
Again, I haven't ever said that I was in support of a national ban. Second of all, that was 8 years ago when I made that statement. I'm not even sure if there was anything further with the clip, but I do know that over the course of the last 8 years and really examining this, and when I was a Weld County Commissioner looking at it, I did change my position or add it to my position. It evolved. And looking at it in the life of the mother is extremely important. With regard to what I've funded at the Weld County Health Department, I've funded programs that basically the nurse-family partnership, which brings a nurse in with low-income first-time moms through their pregnancy and for up to 2 years afterwards so that they have that resource with them. Funded things like breast and cervical cancer screenings. Funded the health clinic. Funded all sorts of programs that are for women's health. I've actually funded that and fought for those programs.
Ms. Kirkmeyer, thank you. Let's talk about energy production and oil and gas jobs and the impact of oil and gas in the district and on the environment. Our Marshall Zellinger has the next question for you, Ms. Kirkmeyer.
Ms. Kirkmeyer, you claim that Ms. Caraveo's vote on state oil and gas regulations threatened thousands of jobs. Since March 2019, Colorado has seen 37% fewer oil and gas jobs. But in that same time frame, oil and gas friendly states, Texas, Wyoming, and Alaska, have also seen significant job loss in oil and gas. Why are you blaming Ms. Caraveo for something that's happening nationwide?
Thank you for the question, because specifically Senate Bill 181, which Ms. Caraveo was the prime sponsor on, again, after we had an election in this state that said, no, we don't want a de facto ban on oil and gas, no, we don't want a setback of 2,500 feet. Within 5 months, we passed a bill, well, we didn't, Ms. Caraveo did, passed a bill, had it signed into law, that essentially did put a ban, a de facto ban on oil and gas, and decrease the number of permits. We went from 5,100 permits approved in 2018 down to about, I think 22. So 22 permits this year, something approximately in that area. So it did kill thousands of jobs. It killed over thousands and thousands of jobs in this district. This district sits on top of the most productive oil and gas field in the nation. She killed those jobs with that bill.
She didn't kill the jobs in Wyoming or Alaska or Texas, though, which also lost jobs in the same time frame in the same industry.
I have no idea what other laws or what other kind of regulations or what was going on within those states. I just know what was going on here in Colorado. Jobs were lost. I know people, several people that are in the industry, that worked in the industry, my son-in-law for one. I know the number of jobs and layoffs that they had to do because there wasn't any energy production going on here in this state.
I guess the question is causality, because it was at a time when the jobs were kind of coming down throughout the industry. I want to continue to talk about oil and gas.
That's not correct. That is not correct. Not in this state. We were at a time where we had over 232,000 jobs in this state that were related to the oil and gas industry. So that's not correct. And we were on an uptrend. We were doing very well. Our economy was doing very well. And with that bill, the passage of that bill, and the drop-off of the number of permits, no more oil and gas activity, drilling permits going on in this state, that killed a number of jobs. Over 12,000 jobs were killed.
But you're not disputing that in the same exact time frame that in oil and gas friendly states, they also lost jobs.
I'm not disputing that,
Okay.
but I'm also saying we don't know all the circumstances that were occurring in that state to understand why they may have lost jobs.
Another question on energy production for Ms. Caraveo, and this again comes from my colleague Marshall Zellinger.
Ms. Caraveo, you have said you are proud of state legislation that encourages a transition to clean energy while looking out for workers whose jobs would be impacted. How are those not two competing statements? How does limiting oil and gas opportunities look out for workers whose jobs would be at risk?
Well, thank you so much for the question, Marshall. They are not opposing statements. I made sure that in what was actually a very moderate bill that we worked with oil and gas industry on, which was Senate Bill 181, that we looked not just at what the oil and gas industry needed to continue in Colorado, which it has continued, and there certainly are still a huge number of jobs in Colorado. It's an important industry that provides great jobs with great benefits, but that doesn't preclude us from investing in future renewable energy sources. They're going to make us independent. They're going to create more jobs in Colorado, and we can do both. We can chew gum and and walk at the same time, and make sure that we're investing in energy jobs such as solar and wind, which importantly Senator Kirkmeyer voted to place further regulations on solar energy when she was a commissioner, which likely limited the number of jobs that we were creating there.
So you're both well aware that one of Colorado's largest polluters is in the 8th Congressional District. It's the Suncor refinery. Ms. Kirkmeyer, what impact do you think Suncor has on the Coloradans who live nearby, primarily Coloradans of color? And what, if anything, should be done about the current situation around Suncor?
With regard to Suncor, I think they need to go through their permitting process, and I think the state health department needs to step up and get them through that process and make sure that they are following the rules and regulations. We have some of the most robust rules and regulations when it comes to air quality and water quality, environmental regulations in this state, in the nation. And I think that if the Department of Health were to step up and make sure that they are following those rules as they go through the permitting process, then the impact would be lessened, if at all, with regard to the neighbor and the surrounding neighborhood.
So as Ms. Caraveo, as Ms. Kirkmeyer points out, a lot of the enforcement falls to the state agencies. But federal government, the EPA, have a role. In fact, they got involved in Suncor's permitting process to say that they were unsatisfied with the way that things were going. What would you like to see happen at Suncor and in the surrounding neighborhoods?
We need to make sure that we are watching the emissions that are coming from Suncor and a lot of other polluters out there. I can tell you that when I was little, I grew up down the street, downwind from Suncor. As a pediatrician, I have seen the effects that bad air quality days have on children. I can look out and see the haze that is over Denver, and I know that that day I'm going to be sending kids to the hospital because they're going to have trouble breathing. Suncor needs to be regulated appropriately. The EPA has a huge role in that. And I should point out that my opponent has said that the EPA just needs to go away. There is going to be difficulty in enforcing the laws that she just talked about if we get rid of the federal agency that is in charge of enforcing those laws. We need to make sure that we're creating a living community for our kids in the future, and that includes regulating emissions.
We have about 5 minutes until your closing statements. I want to give you each the opportunity to ask the other one a question of importance to you. Ms. Caraveo, would you please go first?
Absolutely. Senator Kirkmeyer, you wrote recently that you thought that Medicare is bankrupting the United States economy. You would say that you would make this program temporary, essentially kicking thousands, if not millions, of seniors off of the program. What is your plan for seniors and for their health care needs if you were to end that program as it stands now?
I believe I actually spoke about Medicaid and not necessarily Medicare, which there is a difference, and Medicaid is different. And I did talk about the opportunity to possibly look at block granting with regard to Medicaid and giving states more flexibility to deal with the needs that their citizens have within their state instead of having to go through tremendous amount of bureaucracies and developing state plans all the time. So that's actually what I did talk about was Medicaid. When it comes to Medicare and Social Security, I don't think that we should be making cuts there. I would have actually supported the increase of 8.7%, I believe is what it was, for Social Security and for Medicare. So I didn't say Medicare.
It was specifically in a questionnaire, I should point out, Kyle, that said Medicare. She has also written in the past about defunding Medicaid, which I should point out all of the kids in my clinic rely on, and would also cut Social Security.
Ms. Kirkmeyer, your question for Ms. Caraveo.
Sure. In 2021, you signed a letter along with several other state legislators to President Biden and Speaker Pelosi that basically said you thought we should divest funding with regard to ICE. So in other words, defund ICE and defund the Border Patrol. So I want to know, with regard to defunding ICE and Border Patrol, if you actually think that's a way to secure the border and stop the flow of fentanyl, the dangerous poison that is trafficking across our state border, across our United States border, and would you support that still, where you would defund ICE and defund Border Patrol?
I would not defund either of those agencies. I believe that what we do need to do is invest in 21st century technologies that make sure that we are keeping criminals and drugs from crossing our border, and still looking at comprehensive immigration control that makes sure that communities like mine, the one I grew up in with both of my parents being immigrants, are given the opportunity to legalize their status like my parents were, so that we acknowledge that 11 million Americans who have contributed taxes, who have contributed to our economy, who are parts of our community, have a way to legalize their status.
So you just changed your mind in the last year? Because
a
year ago you wrote a letter to President Biden that said we should defund ICE and defund Border Patrol.
I do not believe.
In other words, not securing.
Are you going to let me
border.
speak? Yeah.
Well, I was finishing up my comments before you interrupted me.
I do not believe in defunding ICE, and I think that there is a lot around immigration control that we need to make sure that we're investing in, something that your party has consistently put roadblocks up against for the growing Latino community.
Thank you both.
So you changed your mind in the last year.
I want to ask you each a question about judgment. Ms. Kirkmeyer, you were one of the leaders of an effort in 2013 to have Northeast Colorado secede, to break away and form a new state over political differences. Secession attempt did not pass. Your own county, Weld, voted it down. Would you take that same problem-solving approach to Congress?
Where I would go out and actually listen to my citizens and follow what they wanted to.
Or break away if you don't get what you want?
Well, actually, we didn't put on the ballot to break away. We put on the ballot at the request of our citizens after we had several forums around our county to talk about it, after the issues that were occurring, where basically there was a war in rural Colorado. Felt like there was a war on Weld County, where they weren't doing snow plowing on state highways in rural Colorado, where they passed laws that were specific to rural Colorado with regard to increase in utility costs, and it wasn't applied to the urban districts. When we asked then Governor Hickenlooper to declare a drought and figure out how to help us with getting water to the #1 agricultural county in the state, and he said no. So there was a lot that was going on. People were very upset. When we asked them, went out and had a discussion with him. They asked the Board of County Commissioners to put on the ballot a discussion about whether or not should we go through the process. That's what was on there. And would I go through that process again? Yes, I would, because even Governor Hickenlooper, who is now U.S. Senator Hickenlooper, said after this effort that it made the state stronger, that it made him listen more to rural Colorado, and that he would give us a better ear.
Need to get in one last question to Ms. Caraveo. You tried to end the taxpayer refunds under Tabor, the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, and voters in Colorado strongly rejected your attempt to do that. Then this year, you tried to personally take credit for the fact that Coloradans got a Tabor tax refund. Is that being straight with people?
You know, I have seen the effects from Tabor in my clinic every single day. I have conversations with families about schools that are not properly funded and how they can't provide services, especially with kids with special needs. That comes from Tabor, but at the end of the day, voters have voted to make Tabor, to continue to have Tabor be the law of the land. And so what we did at the state legislature, which I am very proud about, is to make sure that we made decisions to make that refund fair, to give money back to the working families that really need it in their pockets, not to the wealthy, to make sure that we were giving it in the middle of an inflationary summer when they really needed it, and to make sure that we were helping working families with those Tabor refunds.
So got a clear answer, no regrets on the secession push. Any regrets on trying to take away Tabor refunds?
I think that it really affects the health of children, but it is the law of the land, and so I will follow that law.
It's time for closing statements. We flipped a coin earlier, and Ms. Kirkmeyer, you'll go first.
Thank you very much. You know, as I run for Congress, the number one question I get is, why are you running? And quite frankly, it's because I have 6 grandsons, and this is not the America I grew up in. I grew up on a dairy farm in North Jefferson County. I'm a 4th-generation Coloradoan, came from very modest backgrounds, but I grew up in a country in America that rewarded and valued hard work. My parents taught us that if you worked hard, opportunity came your way. I want that America back, that America that we've lost track on. We are now to a place where we have 40-year high inflation that is causing where people can't afford to make ends meet. They're in debt, their interest rates are going up on their credit cards, their mortgage rates are going up. It's just ridiculous what we've done with the poor policies here. I want America, and if I'm elected to be the first Congresswoman from this district, I pledge my commitment to build an economy that is stronger, one where we cut the deficit, where we get rid of the $30 trillion worth of debt, where we build a nation that is stronger, where we have an opportunity for parents to decide what is the best educational opportunity for their children and pass a parental bill of rights. I would hope that you would vote for me. I'm Barbara Kirkmeyer, KirkmeyerForCongress.com.
Thank you very much. Ms. Caraveo.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Kyle, Marshall, and Anusha, and all of the people who submitted questions from the community. Thank you so much for this discussion today, Ms. Kirkmeyer. And, you know, I got a lot of questions as well about why I decided to run for Congress. I can tell you that my family really reflects this district in so many ways. I was raised as the child of immigrants with a dad who was a construction worker for 51 years, who was able not just to put food on the table for those 4 kids, while my mom was able to stay home and raise us, but was able to put all 4 of us through college. I decided at a very early age that I was going to give back to my community by being a doctor, but I quickly found that a lot of the things that had allowed me to live this American dream that my dad worked so hard for were slipping away for the families that I was seeing in clinic. So I decided to run for the legislature to make sure that we're lowering costs of healthcare, prescription drugs, that we're focusing on affordable housing, and so many other needs that this community needs. I hope that you will entrust me with the ability to do that in Congress.
Thank you both for being here. I appreciate the conversation.
Thank you for having us.
And thank you for watching at home. We have 5 more debates coming up. Details are on 9news.com. For everyone at 9 News, I'm Kyle Clark. Good night.